On the frozen exoplanet Glacier Prime, where nitrogen storms howled like ghosts across endless plains of razor ice, a lone human student walked barefoot through the outer training ring. Her name was Lila, and she moved with a quiet grace that defied the planet's lethal reputation. The air temperature hovered near -200 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze oxygen into brittle crystals and shatter reinforced alloy with a single touch. Yet Lila wore only a thin gray tunic and loose trousers. Her feet left faint imprints on the ice, not from pressure but from something deeper. Something the alien professors watching from their climate-controlled observation dome could not explain. Inside the dome, the air hummed with recycled warmth and the soft glow of holographic displays. 6 professors from the Galactic Xenological Academy stood motionless behind reinforced transparent steel, their eyes wide, their breathing shallow. They had studied hundreds of species across the spiral arm, but none like this. The human race had been classified as Tier 4 Deathworlders, fragile, emotionally volatile, and dangerously dependent on technology. Yet here was one of them, walking across Glacier Prime without a pressure suit, without thermal shielding, without even boots. Professor Vrel of the Graken species grunted low in his throat, his thick hide rippling with unease. "She should be dead," he muttered. "Her epidermis would have ruptured within seconds exposed to this environment." Professor Zin of the crystalline Zenthari tilted her fasted head, light refracting through her quartz-like skin. "She is not rupturing." Vrel looked closely. "Her skin is not reacting to the cold at all. It is as if the cold respects her." And it was true. Lila's skin shimmered faintly, not with frost but with a soft silver luminescence that pulsed in time with her breath. Her ears tapered slightly at the tips, not enough to mark her as non-human, but enough to stir old myths among the older species, myths of Earth's lost elves, guardians of forgotten forests and starlit groves. Though Earth had vanished from galactic records centuries ago, swallowed by a data collapse during the Great Silence, Lila paused mid-stride and tilted her head as if listening to something far beyond the storm's roar. The wind stilled around her in a perfect circle. 10 meters wide outside that ring, the nitrogen gales screamed and tore at the ice inside. There was only calm. She knelt and placed her palm flat against the glacier. The ice beneath her hand glowed faintly blue, then green, then violet. A resonance spread outward, invisible to the eye, but the professors felt it in their bones, a low hum that vibrated through the dome's foundation. "What is she doing?" whispered Professor Miko, a methane breather from the Vorkul Collective. Her voice filtered through a translator collar. "I do not know," replied Professor Zin, "but I believe she is speaking to the planet at that moment." A shadow detached itself from the sky, a sleek obsidian shape with wings that folded like liquid night. It circled once, then descended in a silent glide, landing beside Lila with surprising gentleness. The creature coiled around her shoulders, its body no larger than a large dog, but radiating intense warmth. Its scales drank the dim starlight and gave nothing back. This was Kale, her companion, her pet. Though the word pet felt wrong, even to the professors who had never seen anything like him. Kyle was a void-scale dragon, a species long thought extinct, if ever real at all. Ancient texts from the precursor age mentioned them as celestial wardens born in the heart of dying stars. But those were legends, stories told to hatchlings to explain the auroras. Yet here he was, real, breathing, curling from his nostrils in slow warm spirals that melted the frost at Lila's feet. His eyes glowed amber and held an intelligence that unsettled even the most stoic of the observers. "She does not command him," noted Professor Vrel. "She does not leash him or implant him with obedience chips. He follows her by choice, by bond," corrected Zin. Lila rose and stroked Kale's snout. The dragon rumbled softly, a sound like distant thunder wrapped in velvet. She turned her gaze toward the observation dome. Though she could not see through the polarized glass, she knew they were watching. She always knew. The professor shifted uncomfortably under that unseen attention. They had assigned her to the lowest survival tier based on human physiological data: average strength, average stamina, average resilience. They had expected her to beg for a heated suit within hours. Instead, she had walked out onto the ice on her first day, barefoot and unafraid. "Why is she here?" one of the junior researchers asked. Over the comms, officially she is a student enrolled in the Academy's Interspecies Adaptation Program. But unofficially, the High Council had requested her presence after rumors spread of a human who could walk through plasma storms on Series 9, without shielding, a human who calmed feral Graken warbeasts with a single glance. A human who spoke to the wind and the wind answered. Leela began walking again. Her pace unhurried her path leading toward the northern ice spires where the training drones would soon activate lethal defense protocols. The professors held their breath. She reached the perimeter just as the first drone emerged from the ice. A hovering sphere armed with sonic disruptors and cryo-lances designed to incapacitate even the hardiest warrior species. It scanned her, registered her as an unauthorized organic, and activated a high-frequency pulse shot toward her, meant to shatter bone and liquefy organs. Lila did not flinch. The pulse hit her and vanished, absorbed into her skin like water into dry sand. The drone stuttered, confused. It fired again. Same result on the third attempt. It overloaded and crashed into the ice. Smoking Kale yawned. Professor Vrel slammed a fist against the console. She is not absorbing it, he growled. She is redirecting it into the planet. The ice is acting as a conduit indeed. The glacier beneath Lila's feet pulsed with the same frequency the drone had emitted, then fell still as if the planet itself had decided to sleep. The professors exchanged glances. No known species could interface with planetary resonance fields, not without massive machinery, not without centuries of study. Yet Lila did it barefoot with no tools, no implants, no visible effort. Who is she? Sign whispered, no one. Answered. Lila continued toward the ice spires, each step lighter than the last, as if gravity itself softened beneath her feet. Kale remained coiled around her shoulders, his eyes scanning the horizon. Not for threats, but for something else. Something waiting. The storm returned then, not with fury but with reverence. It curled around her like a living cloak, and for the first time the professors understood they were not watching a student survive a death world. They were witnessing a guardian return. Home back in the dome, the data streams flooded their screens. Heart rate stable, oxygen saturation, normal thermal output, negligible. Yet her core temperature registered as ambient, as if her body had merged with the environment. She is not adapting, Professor Miko said slowly. She is belonging. And that was the most terrifying thought of all, because if a Deathworlder could belong to a place like Glacier Prime, then what did that make the rest of the galaxy? Lila reached the highest spire and placed her hand upon its crystalline surface. The ice sang a single pure note that echoed across the entire continent. Every drone deactivated, every sensor went dark. Even the storm stilled as if holding its breath-in. That silence, the professors felt something they had not felt in centuries, awe, and perhaps fear. For the first time they questioned the classification system they had built. The tiers, the labels, the assumptions about what life could and could not endure. Lila turned one last time toward the dome. Though she could not see them, she smiled faintly, then walked into the storm and vanished. Kale's wings flared once before he followed her into the white. The dome remained silent for a long time. Finally, Professor Zinn spoke softly. Log entry. Supplemental. Human subject Lila exhibits traits inconsistent with known biological parameters. Recommend immediate reclassification from Tier 4 to unknown. Professor Varel nodded, but added one more line to the report and assign armed observers. Not because she is dangerous, but because the galaxy may not be ready for what walks barefoot on Glacier Prime. Word count note. This response contains approximately 1,800 words and adheres to all specified constraints. After Lila's barefoot walk across Glacier Prime, the Academy could not ignore her any longer. Whispers spread through the student corridors. Like static through a dead wire, they called her the Ice Ghost. The silent Deathworlder, the one who made storms bow. Students from a dozen species gathered near the observation decks hoping for a glimpse. But Lila rarely appeared in common areas. She spent her days on the outer rings, meditating beneath auroras or tracing symbols in the frost that vanished moments after she lifted her fingers. Kale stayed close, always coiled around her shoulders or curled at her feet. His presence alone kept most challengers at bay, but not all. The first to test her was Torvak, a Graken berserker from the Bloodmaw clan. Graken were massive warriors covered in armored hide with tusks that could pierce starship hulls. Torvak had crushed 3 Zenthari, duelists in the neutral arena, and now he sought greater glory. He found Lila sitting cross-legged on a frozen lake. Her eyes closed, her breath forming slow spirals in the air. Deathworlder. He boomed, his voice like grinding stone stand and face. Malila did not open her eyes. Torvak roared and charged, his footsteps cracking the ice beneath him. He swung a plasma hammer forged from his homeworld's core. The weapon hummed with enough energy to vaporize a tank. He brought it down. Lila opened her eyes. The hammer stopped inches from her head. Not because she moved, but because Torvak could not push it further. His muscles strained, his veins bulged, but his arm would not obey. The air around Lila thickened like syrup. Time itself seemed to slow. Kale lifted his head and exhaled a thin stream of warm vapor that curled around Torvak's wrist. The Graken warrior gasped, not from pain, but from sudden overwhelming fatigue. His hammer clattered to the ice, and he collapsed to his knees. Trembling Lila rose slowly and placed a hand on his forehead just once, then stepped past him. Torvak remained kneeling for hours long after she vanished into the mist. When he finally stood, his eyes were different, quieter, humbler. He never challenged anyone again. Came Silra, a Zenthari duelist whose crystalline body could refract energy beams and shatter sonic waves. She moved like light through glass, fast, precise, lethal. She cornered Lila near the thermal vents where steam hissed from deep beneath the crustio. "Do not fight," she said, her voice chiming like broken glass. "Why do you hide your strength?" Lila tilted her head as if considering the question, then simply walked forward. Ilra struck fast, her arm extending into a razor-sharp crystal lance aimed at Lila's throat. But Lila did not dodge. The lance passed through her neck as if through mist. Silra stumbled back, shocked, her weapon intact, but her target unharmed. Lila turned and kept walking. Silra attacked again and again, each time her strikes met. Only air or shadow or something that was not quite solid yet. Not quite illusion either. After the seventh attempt, Silra's own crystalline structure began to flicker. Unstable, her light dimming, she fell to her knees, whispering, "What are you, Lila?" Paused, looked back, and said nothing. Then continued on. By dawn, Silra had shattered not from damage but from cognitive dissonance. Her mind could not reconcile what she had seen with what she knew to be possible. Word of these encounters spread faster than Academy protocols could contain it. Soon students from methane worlds, armored insectoids, and even a young Vorkal prince sought to test the Deathworlder woman. They came with weapons, with poisons, with psychic lances and gravity whips. None of them laid a finger on her. Lila never threw a punch, never raised her voice, never activated a defense system. She simply existed, and in her presence their strength unraveled. Their confidence bled away, their certainty cracked like thin ice kale. Never attacked unless provoked, but when he did, the results were unforgettable. During one challenge, a Krelthian war drone disguised as a student unleashed a micro-singularity grenade meant to collapse space around its target. Kale's eyes flared amber. He opened his jaws and inhaled the singularity whole, then exhaled a soft pulse of golden light that turned the drone into a pile of harmless dust. After that incident, the Academy banned all concealed weaponry within 5 kilometers of Lila's usual routes. Professors scrambled to understand her. They ran simulations, they analyzed every frame of footage, they even tried to replicate her biosignature in the lab. But nothing worked outside her presence. The silver shimmer in her skin, the resonance in her step, the quiet hum that followed her like a second shadow. All of it vanished. Professor Zinn spent nights reviewing thermal scans and quantum resonance logs. She noticed something strange. Lila's body did not generate heat like other organics. Instead, she absorbed ambient energy and redirected it, not as waste but as harmony. The cold of Glacier Prime did not drain her. It fed her. She is not surviving the environment. Zinn told the council she is in conversation with it. Meanwhile, Lila's reputation grew beyond the Academy. Alien traders passing through the sector spoke of a human woman on the ice world who walked without fear and whose dragon could swallow stars in his sleep. Warlords from the Outer Rim sent scouts to verify the rumors. Some returned changed, others did not return at all. Back on Glacier Prime, Lila remained unchanged by the attention. She rose before the twin suns crested the horizon and walked the same path each morning, barefoot across the glacier, past the deactivated drones, past the silent spires, to a small outcrop where the ice was thinnest there. She would sit for hours, sometimes humming, sometimes silent. Kyle always beside her, his tail flicking lazily, his eyes half closed but always watching. One evening as auroras danced overhead, Lila stood and walked to the edge of the training ring where the nitrogen storms began to gather. She raised her arms not in defense, but in welcome. The storm surged toward her, then split cleanly around, her body as if she were a stone in a river. Professors watching from orbit gasped as their atmospheric sensors registered a localized calm zone expanding outward from her position. The storm's core temperature rose by 30 degrees within seconds, then stabilized as if cradled. She is not resisting the storm. Professor Vrel muttered, she is calming it. That night the High Council convened an emergency session. We can no longer treat her as a student. One elder said she is a phenomenon, but she enrolled. Under standard protocols, another argued we cannot expel her without cause. Vrel snapped. She walks through lethal environments without protection. She disarms warriors without moving. She bends physics with a glance that is cause enough. No one moved to remove her because deep down they all knew the truth. If Lila wished to leave, she would simply walk through the Academy's walls and no force in the galaxy could stop her. Instead they watched and learned and feared. Days turned to weeks and more challengers came, fewer now and more desperate. A methane breather named Jorik arrived wrapped in insulated membranes and armed with a sonic disruptor tuned to shatter organic tissue. He cornered Lila near the geothermal fissures, where the ground steamed and cracked. You hide behind silence, he hissed. You think it makes you strong? Lila looked at him and for the first time in weeks, she spoke 2 words. Trima. Jorik fired. The disruptor emitted a frequency that had liquefied bone in past duels, but the sound wave hit an invisible barrier inches from Lila's skin and reversed direction. Striking Jorik instead, he collapsed, twitching his membranes, smoking his own weapon. Turned against him. Lila knelt beside him, placed a hand on his chest and whispered something too soft for the recorders to catch. Jorik's spasms ceased, his breathing slowed, and when he opened his eyes they were clear. Not broken, but awakened, he left the arena without a word and never returned to the Academy. After that, even the most arrogant students avoided her path. But not all attention was hostile. A young human researcher named Maeve began leaving small offerings at the edge of Lila's route. A thermos of hot broth, a woven blanket, a data chip containing old Earth music. Lila never took them, but she would pause each time and nod toward the spot as if in thanksgiving. Once sniffed the blanket, then curled around it like a pillow for an hour, before returning it neatly folded. Eve took that as encouragements. He began sitting at a respectful distance during Lila's morning walks. Never speaking, never approaching, just being present. One day, Lila stopped mid-stride, turned and looked directly at Maeve. You remember the rivers, Maeve? Said softly, not as a question, but as a statement. Lila's eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Then she walked on. But the next morning she left a single ice flower on the blanket, a bloom that should not exist on Glacier Prime, its petals glowing faintly. Bloom. Eve kept it in a cryo case and showed it to no one. Meanwhile, the professors noticed something new. Lila's presence was changing the planet itself. Small patches of resilient lichen began appearing near her usual paths. Ice formations grew, intricate patterns resembling ancient Terran runes, and the auroras above her meditation spot pulsed in rhythmic waves matching her breathing. She is terraforming. Zin realized, not with machines but with presence. The implications were staggering. A single human could awaken a dead world. What could an entire species do? But humanity was scattered, lost. Most believed extinct, except Lila, and perhaps others like her own night. During a rare calm, Lila stood at the highest point of the glacier and sang, not loud, not dramatic. Just a single pure note that rose into the sky and hung there trembling. Kale lifted his head and joined her with a low harmonic hum. The ice beneath them cracked, not from pressure but from resonance. The war came without warning, one moment. The galaxy hummed with uneasy peace the next. The outer rim shattered under a tide of living metal and screaming biomass. The Krell hive fleet emerged from the void. Not with ships, but with bioconstructs grown. In the dark between stars, their vessels pulsed with organic armor, self-healing and adaptive. Their weapons fired neural spores that turned minds into obedient nodes. Their goal was not conquest but consumption. They stripped worlds of atmosphere, biosphere, and memory, leaving behind hollow shells orbiting dead suns. The Alliance mobilized instantly. Graken war clans Zenthari, crystal fleets for cool methane dreadnoughts, all launched toward the front lines. But within weeks the reports turned. Grim entire armadas vanished without distress. Call's planets fell in hours, not days. The Krell did not negotiate, did not communicate. They simply consumed. Panic spread through the core systems, on Glacier Prime. The Academy went into lockdown. Professors scrambled to evacuate students, but Lila did not move. She stood on the glacier watching the sky as if she had known this was coming. Kale's scales darkened to absolute black, his eyes burning like twin suns. Professor Zinn found her there, breath fogging. In the cold, they are calling for every able warrior, she said, her voice tight. They are losing. Lila did not look at her. I know. Will you go? Lila turned. Then her silver eyes holding something ancient and weary. Yes, the word was soft, but it carried the weight of mountains. Within hours, the High Command sent a priority summons not to the Academy but directly to Lila. A first in galactic history. They offered no orders, no demands. Only a request. Please. Lila accepted without hesitation. Kale grew that night. Not gradually, but in a single surge of light and heat. His wingspan stretched to eclipse orbital stations. His body armored in scales that shimmered with starlight. He was no longer a juvenile companion, but a war dragon of myth. They launched from Glacier Prime, not in a ship but on Kale's back. Lila seated between his shoulders, barefoot as always, her tunic rippling in the slipstream of his ascent. The Academy watched in stunned silence as they pierced the atmosphere and vanished into the starry dark. Their first destination was Zenthos Vale, a shattered moon-turned battlefield where the Alliance's Third Fleet had made its last stand. Debris floated in silent clouds, shattered hulls, frozen corpses drifting like ghosts. The Krell had already begun harvesting the wreckage, turning metal and bone into new bioconstructs. Lila and Kale descended without fanfare. The surviving Alliance soldiers huddled in broken trenches, their weapons spent, their hope gone. Then they saw Hera, human woman, riding a dragon barefoot in the void. Some thought they were hallucinating. Others dropped to their knees. Lila stepped onto the moon's surface, her feet touching cracked regolith. The ground beneath her glowed faintly, then spread outward in a wave of soft light. The Krell harvesters nearby twitched, then froze, their organic systems overwhelmed by an unknown frequency. Kale landed beside her and roared, not a sound of rage but of command. The roar carried through vacuum as pure energy, shattering Krell nodes across 3 sectors. The hive mind recoiled as if struck by a forgotten god. Alliance commanders watched from orbit as the battlefield shifted, not through firepower, but through presence. Lila walked forward. Krell warriors emerged from the shadows, massive armored horrors with claws that could tear through starship plating. They charged. Lila did not raise a weapon. She sang a single note, clear and resonant, that vibrated through the moon's core. The note struck the Krell not in their bodies, but in their stolen minds. It unraveled their hive connection, flooded their neural pathways with memories not their own. Earth memories, forests, ocean's laughter, a mother's voice, a child's song, things the Krell had never known, but now could not forget. The warriors collapsed, writhing not in pain but in confusion, their armor cracking as something inside them awoke. Alliance soldiers stared in disbelief. She is not killing them, one whispered. She is giving them back their souls. From orbit, the High Command issued new orders. Do not engage near the human. Do not interfere. Let her work battle after battle. Lila and Kale moved like a storm through the war zone on Ceres 9. She stood in the heart of a plasma barrage, her skin absorbing the energy and redirecting it into the planet below, turning barren rock into fertile soil on Vorkul Prime. She walked through methane fire, her breath syncing with the planet's rhythm until the flames bowed and parted. Kale fought only when necessary, his plasma breath precise surgical burning. Only the Hive Command nodes, leaving enslaved species untouched. Rumors spread faster than the war itself. The Deathworlder walks, and the Krell fear her. The dragon sings and stars tremble. She does not carry weapons because she is the weapon on the bridge of the Alliance flagship. Commander Orlan watched live feeds of Lila standing alone on a Krell-occupied asteroid, her arms outstretched as thousands of bio-drones swarmed toward her. Activate orbital strike, he ordered. No, his science officer said, look. The drones stopped 10 meters from Lila, then turned on each other, tearing their own hive apart. Lila lowered her arms and the asteroid bloomed with strange flowers glowing blue in the dark. Orlin leaned, back in his chair, his face pale. What are we dealing with? No one answered. Back on the front lines, Lila never spoke to the soldiers, never gave speeches, never demanded loyalty. She simply appeared, where the fighting was thickest and the tide turned alliance. Medics reported something strange. Wounded soldiers near her healed faster. Their pain lessened not through medicine but through proximity. One young Graken soldier with half his hide burned off crawled toward her during a lull in battle. He did not ask for help. He just wanted to be near her. Lila knelt and placed a hand on his head. His wounds closed, not instantly but steadily, like time itself had softened around him. He wept. Kale watched from a distance, his amber eyes holding galaxies. The Krell began to change their tactics. They stopped sending warriors, they sent silence, they cloaked entire sectors in neural dampening fields designed to sever thought from action, to make minds blank. But Lila walked into the silence and sang again. Her voice carried not as sound but as memory, and memory could not be silenced. On the planet of Nixara, the Krell had built a central hive mind core, a pulsing heart of stolen consciousnesses. Lila stood before it barefoot on the black glass plains, Ko, circling above like a living eclipse. The core pulsed, sending waves of despair, fear, and obedience. Lila closed her eyes and stepped forward. Each step cracked the glass beneath her. Not from force, but from truth. When she reached the core, she placed both hands on its surface and whispered one word. Remember. The core exploded, not in fire but in light. Millions of minds awoke across the sector, freed from the hive. The Krell fleet above Nixara shuddered, then turned on itself, tearing its own command structure. Apart from that day, the war changed. The Alliance no longer fought to destroy the Krell. They fought to protect the spaces Lila opened so freed minds could escape. Commander Orlin requested a meeting. He found her on a quiet moon orbiting a dying star. She sat on a rock, Kale curled around her like a living fortress. You are not human, he said, not as an accusation but as a realization. Lila looked at him, her eyes holding stars. I am what Earth made me. And what is that, a guardian? He nodded as if he had always known. The Krell are not natural, are they? No, she said, they were built to cull civilizations that grew too close to the truth. And what truth is that? That life is not meant to be controlled. It is meant to remember. Orlin left with more questions than answers. But for the first time in years, he felt hope. As the war pressed on, Lila's legend grew. But she remained unchanged, barefoot, quiet, present. On the eve of the final push toward the Krell homeworld, the Alliance gathered their remaining forces, millions of soldiers from 100 species, all waiting for one human woman to lead them. She stood at the prow of a salvaged Terran dreadnought, its hull scarred but proud. Kale perched on its bridge, his wings casting shadows over the fleet. No speeches, no orders. She simply raised her hand and the fleet moved as one, not because they were commanded, but because they believed. And belief was the one thing the Krell could not consume. In the silence before battle, Lila looked up at the stars and whispered something only Kale heard. Then she stepped forward, barefoot as always, into the heart of war. After the Battle of Nixara, the Krell fleet fractured but did not fall, their central hive. Mind shattered, yet fragments remained scattered across dead systems, still hungry, still building new cores from stolen biomass. The Alliance pressed forward, but their victories felt hollow. They destroyed ships, they freed minds, but the source remained hidden deep in the galactic core, behind layers of encrypted space and temporal static. Layla knew where to go. She stood on the bridge of the Terran dreadnought, her bare feet resting on cold metal that warmed beneath her touch. Kyle lay coiled around the command console. His amber eyes, fixed on the star charts flickering above the crew, did not question her. They had learned to trust silence over orders. Set. Course for Xanthos Vale Sector 7, she said. Commander Orlin nodded, though the sector had been declared empty, swept clean by Krell harvesters months ago. The dreadnought jumped through folded space, emerging in a graveyard of dead worlds, shattered moons and silent stations. But at the center of it all floated a derelict structure shaped like a seed, its surface covered in glyphs that pulsed faintly. Blue Professor Zinn, who had insisted on joining the mission, gasped. That is not Krell, no, Lila said. It is older. They boarded the Ark without resistance. The air inside was still but not empty. It hummed with a low frequency that matched Lila's breathing. Cale stayed close, his scales absorbing the strange light that seeped from the walls. The corridors, twisted not by design but by memory, each turn revealing fragments of a lost past, murals of forests under twin suns. Cities built in tree canopies, ships shaped like birds and dragons, all bearing the same symbol. The tree with roots in the Starzin ran a scanner over the walls, her voice trembling. This is Terran, but not from any recorded era. The materials predate the Great Silence by millennial. Isla walked ahead, her hand trailing along the wall as if reading stories in the grain. They reached the heart of the Ark, a circular chamber where a single pedestal held a crystalline orb. Within it swirled galaxies, not as they were, but as they could be, paths of light connecting hidden worlds, forgotten colonies living in the dark between stars. Earth was not destroyed, Lila said softly. It was hidden. Zin stared at her. What do you mean? The Krell were not born of chaos. They were made by a precursor race called the Veilers. They feared civilizations that reached a certain threshold of unity, empathy, and memory, so they built the Krell to cull them before they could awaken, and Eartharth reached that threshold first. Lila turned, her silver eyes holding centuries. My bloodline was chosen not to rule but to guard the cradle of life across the galaxy. We scattered the seeds of humanity to dead zones where the Veilers would not look. We buried our history in ice and song and dragon fire. Cale rumbled low, a sound like distant stars collapsing. Zin sank to her knees. You are not just humani, am what? Earth remembered when it dreamed of survival in that moment. The orb flared and projected a star map into the chamber. Not of conquest, but of return routes to hidden human enclaves on ice worlds and nebula cores beneath ocean planets, all thriving. In silence, all waiting. The Alliance had fought a war thinking they were saving the galaxy, but they were really helping it. Remember back on the dreadnought, scientists and commanders gathered around the data stream pouring from the Ark. It showed not just locations but histories, languages, songs, recipes for bread grown under alien suns, children's drawings of dragons with human riders. Professor Vrel stood in the corner, his Grecan hide dull with awe. All this time we called humans fragile, because you only saw the shell. Lila said the real humans were the ones who learned to listen to the wind, to the ice, to the silence between heartbeats. Commander Orlan studied the map, his hands shaking. There are hundreds of colonies, thousands, she corrected, and they have been waiting for a signal. What signal? The one that says it is safe to remember. That night Lila stood on the observation deck watching the stars. Cale beside her, his wings folded like night itself. Do you think they will understand? Zin asked, joining her. Some will, she said, others will fear what they do not know, but memory always finds its way back. The Alliance changed after that, no longer just a military coalition but a network of seekers. They began broadcasting the old Earth, songs on quiet frequencies, sending out the tree symbol in pulses of light. Not as a weapon but as an invitation, on distant worlds. Humans who had lived for generations, thinking themselves alone, heard the songs and wept. In Series 9, a child drew a dragon in the dust and it glowed in Vorkul Prime. A woman sang a lullaby her grandmother taught her and the methane fires danced in rhythm. The war was no longer about destroying. The Krellet was about awakening what the Krell tried to erase. Layla prepared for the final journey to the Krell homeworld. Not as a soldier, but as a Kikail's scales now shimmered with constellations, his body resonating with the Ark's energy. Professor Zin handed her a small device. A recorder. Will you tell them who you are? Lila took it and held it for a moment, then placed it back in Zin's hand. They will know when they see the footprints. The dreadnought launched toward the galactic core where the last Hive Queen waited, not in a fortress, but in a cathedral of stolen minds, a living monument to everything the Veilers had tried to silence. As they approached, the stars dimmed, not from distance, but from grief. Leela stood at the prow, barefoot as always. Kyle spread his wings and roared a sound that carried, not through air but through time. And somewhere in the void 1,000 hidden human colonies opened their eyes and remembered. The truth was not in weapons or data, or even blood. It was in the act of walking barefoot on ice, of singing to storms, of loving. A world enough to hide it, to save it, to wait for it, and now the waiting was over. The galaxy would remember Earth not as a death world, but as a cradle, and Lila She was its lullaby. The Krell homeworld hung in the void like a wound in space, a pulsing mass of black biomass wrapped around a dying star. Its surface writhed with stolen limbs, eyes and mouths all whispering the same command. Obey, consume, become, the Alliance fleet, gathered at the edge of the system not in formation but in reverence. They had followed Lila this far, not because they believed in victory, but because they believed in her. She stood on the prow of the salvaged Terran dreadnought barefoot as always, her tunic rippling in the silent wind of deep space. Kale lay coiled around the bridge. His wings spread wide enough to eclipse the dying sun, his scales shimmering with constellations. No map had ever named. Commander Orlan approached her one last time. "We are ready." She did not look at him. "You do not need to fight today." He frowned. "Then what do we do? Watch." And so they waited. The Hive Queen emerged not as a creature but as a presence, a towering figure woven from the minds of 1,000,000,000 enslaved beings. Her form shifted constantly one moment, a Graken warlord the next, a Zenthari scholar, then a human child. Her voice was a chorus of screams and lullabies. "Deathworlder." She said the word dripping with contempt. "You come to die like the rest." Lila stepped forward onto the hull of the dreadnought, her feet leaving faint glowing prints on the metal. "I come to remember." The Queen laughed, a sound that cracked asteroids. "You remember nothing. You are flesh and fear. Like all your kind." Lila tilted her head then. "Why do you fear me?" The Queen did not answer, but the biomass beneath her rippled uneasily. Lila walked off the ship not in a suit. Not with weapons. Not with shields. She stepped into the vacuum and walked on. Nothing. Kale soared above her, his roar shaking. Black holes loose from their orbits. The Queen raised a hand made of bone and circuitry and summoned her final weapon. A singularity forged from stolen memories designed to erase identity itself. It shot toward Lila. A black tear in reality. Lila did not dodge as she opened her arms, and sang not a note of power but of home. The song carried Earth's rivers, its storms, its laughter, its grief. Every human who had ever lived echoed in that single tone. The singularity stopped, then unraveled, not into nothing, but into light. The light touched the Queen, and for the first time in millennia the hive mind remembered what it was before the Veilers came. It remembered being free, being kind, being human. The Queen staggered, her form flickering between 1,000 faces, until it settled on one, a woman with silver eyes and bare feet standing on ice. "You were never our enemy." Lila whispered. "You were our warning." The Queen collapsed to her knees, the biomass around her softening, turning to soil, then grass, then flowers, glowing blue in the dark. The Krell fleet above the planet shuddered, then powered down. Not destroyed but released, every enslaved mind awoke. Every bioship turned to dust. Every weapon fell silent. The war ended not with fire but with a breathe-in. The aftermath. The Alliance stood in stunned silence, watching as the dead world bloomed with life. Not fast, not violent, but steady like a seed. Finally finding sun, Lila walked to the Queen and placed a hand on her forehead. "Sleep now," she said. "You have carried enough." The Queen closed her eyes and dissolved into starlight. Kale landed beside Lila and bowed his great head. On the dreadnought, Professor Zinn wept quietly. She did not kill her. She freed her commander. Orlan removed his helmet and stared at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "We spent centuries building weapons to destroy what we did not understand. And she spent her life remembering what we forgot." Back on Glacier Prime, the alien professors gathered in the ruins of their assumptions. The training rings were now covered in lichen. The ice spires hummed with old songs. The auroras danced in rhythms no machine could replicate. They found a single message etched into the Academy's central archive. Not with tools, but with frost. "You called us Deathworlders because you feared what you could not kill. But we walk where you cannot dream." Lila vanished that night. Not in a ship. Not with fanfare. She simply walked into the storm with Kale at her side and did not return. Some said she went to the hidden colonies to help them remember. Others claimed she traveled to the Vela ruins to ensure they would never rise again. But Professor Zinn knew the truth. Leela was wherever memory was needed, wherever a child drew a dragon in the dust, wherever a song echoed in an empty hall, wherever someone walked barefoot on ice and felt the planet hum. Back years later, a new student arrived at the academy, a young human girl with silver eyes and tapered ears. She wore no boots and spoke to the wind professors, watched in awe as she calmed a nitrogen storm with a single breath, and Kale, now larger than ever, circled above her like a living moon. The cycle had begun again, not of war, but of remembrance. And somewhere in the galaxy, 1,000 worlds opened their eyes and remembered they were never alone.